Welcome to another episode of The Horrific Podcast. We're two musicians who used to play in a band together and share a passion for scary movies. Each week we pick a different horror movie and dissect it to figure out what it was trying to accomplish, how well it did, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. If you haven't seen the movie we're talking about, then don't worry. The first half of the episode will be pretty high level and spoiler free, and then we'll play a warning before we start talking about any major plot twists in the ending. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. So we're continuing our month of slasher sequels.
Yep.
And this week we went with Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2.
Yeah.
Had you seen this one before?
I own it, but I hadn't seen it, no.
I hadn't seen it either, and this may be the weirdest movie we've watched for the podcast.
Yeah, it's pretty strange.
To me, it was a really big departure from the original in style. I mean, kind of like what it was trying to be. And there was a lot of stuff that just didn't really make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But even some of the fundamental things about the previous movie, like Freddy's relationship with the non-dream world, was kind of different.
Right.
So, anyway, there's lots of things to talk about with this. I'm excited to discuss it. You want me to do the intro and then we'll get started?
Let's do this.
Sweet. In 1985, New Line Cinema released A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. This second installment of the famous franchise was written by David Chaskin and directed by Jack Sholder, neither of whom are Wes Craven. This story picks up 5 years after the events in the original and follows the main character Jesse, who begins having scary dreams about a man in a red and green sweater after his family moves into the house previously occupied by the Thompsons in the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. This film was made on a budget of around $3 million and brought in over $30 million at the box office. You can currently rent it for streaming on Amazon Prime Video for 99 cents.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it before, but like I said, I own it because I bought like a Nightmare on Elm Street box set.
Oh, nice, yeah. And
I probably had just watched Nightmare on Elm Street, like I don't know if I've watched the sequels to it.
Yeah.
But
well, I understand you did some reading about this movie.
I did do a little bit of reading. So, as kind of stated, Wes Craven wasn't part of this one. He didn't write or direct it. One of the reasons that I was reading was because he never intended it to be like to have sequels. Mm-hmm. Like, so he was just like screw you guys, it's not supposed to have one.
Yeah.
But as we all know, the big corporations won out and did the sequel to it. So that's why there's a lot of differences, which I figure we'll talk about soon. Also, initially, they didn't want to hire Robert Englund to do Freddy again. I guess his demands were a little too high. So they tried to do it with, I think it was just like an extra. I don't know if it was anyone specifically. And like they did some tests and they were just like, no, it's not going to work out. And so they hired Robert Englund back. This one I actually thought was fake, but then I saw it on multiple sources. Yet again, I thought it was fake, but apparently it's true that Brad Pitt, Christian Slater, John Stamos all auditioned to play Jesse.
Oh, wow.
I think there's like a story of how Jesse got it. We'll just let the listeners look it up and tell me if that's 100% true or not. Because, it's just like, I mean, it was mid-'80s, so like they weren't as famous yet, but John Stamos was like on his way. So anyway, they actually named the town that this movie takes place in, which I thought was kind of strange that they hadn't done that in the first one, but...
Well, what was the name of the town?
Springwood.
Oh.
Yep. I noticed it at the beginning, like it was on like a water tower, but because I was like, that's strange, it's not Springfield. And then I thought about The Simpsons for a little bit, but I think it's like Springwood, Ohio. Let's see, this movie, I think it says in there, but it takes place 5 years after. I know it says it, but it takes place 5 years after.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's about all I have.
Yeah, so again, you've managed to segue very nicely into some of the things in my notes about this movie.
Nice.
So I mean, like, one of these days, people are going to think we actually put some planning into this, but really it just happens. Yeah.
There's no planning. In fact, we weren't even sure what time we were fixing to record until it was like, I'm ready. And it's like, okay.
I only sometimes watch the movie. But yeah, so one thing that stood out to me, because we talked about it when we did the podcast for the first Nightmare on Elm Street, was I felt like this one really was trying to expand the story out a lot more. And one of the first things was just, he like very deliberately says, my parents just bought a new house on Elm Street. Yeah. Whereas there was no reference to anything being Elm Street in the previous movie.
Right.
And so like you mentioned, like, hey, it gave it a town. But I really feel like a lot of the movie was centered around wanting to develop the character of Freddy. But they did it in a really different way than in the first movie. And that stood out to me a lot because when we watched Halloween 1 and 2, I mean, that was basically, you know, Halloween 2 picked up right where the first one left off. You're right back into the Michael Myers cutting people and, you know, like being basically the same movie. Right. With Friday the 13th, it was a different villain, but it was basically the same concept in that you have a person who is a real physical human who is going around slowly killing off the camp counselors at a isolated summer camp. In this one, though, in the first movie, Freddy was like this kind of a ghost or some kind of creature that existed on a different plane of existence that attacked people in their dreams, which in and of itself is terrifying. But this one, it felt like less, it was almost like a haunting in the first one, whereas this one was more like a possession movie. Yeah, definitely. It took on like an entirely different vibe because of that. Like it was like it was trying to be scary in a different way. And I realized that in the beginning of the movie he was still, you know, attacking in the dreams and stuff, but it was all sort of moving towards this idea of him going towards possessing Jesse. And I didn't know that going into it. Like that's something that you sort of find out over the course of the movie. So there were a lot of things in the beginning where going into it, I had made assumptions based on the previous movie that weren't valid anymore. And so I thought that it was just an interesting twist, and it makes total sense that it's a different writer because it's almost like a different character for Freddy.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, I guess we could get into the possession a little bit later, but you can absolutely tell that Wes Craven didn't write this, which is almost like a little insulting personally. Like it's just like they just took it so far from the original. Yeah. Still trying to maintain the typical 80s slasher, which you know I love, but also I just want to put this out there too, that Freddy only had 13 minutes of screen time throughout the whole movie. And that for me is a little bit frustrating because the movie's it's hour and 26 minutes long. Yeah. And so it's just like, man, like I don't know math very well, but that's like a low percentage of screen time.
Yeah. For the character who is the reason you're watching the movie.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. When I watch these movies, I don't think I'm necessarily rooting for like the good guy. I'm rooting for the bad guy.
Yeah. Well, and these movies don't typically, the past few we've watched hadn't had very compelling good guys either. Exactly, You're not really the type of people you cheer for, but yeah.
This also, you know, they have the joke that Jesse was one of the first male scream queens.
Yeah. His scream was so funny. Yeah. It was like, oh yeah.
You know, using the term scream queen as in like, you always hear that with the female leads. Yes,
because there's always one female left at the end. That's the one that,
yeah. And which says something. They're gonna out survive us. It was definitely interesting. I think as far as like the cinematography, I think that they kind of get similar in a way, but they also did something that I actually really liked when they went to, like when it was like going into the dream. I think it was like 3 times throughout the movie, it showed like basically the house, and it was dark, and it like that red door really shined through the actual house that Jesse lives in, and it was almost like, because it was kind of confusing on is this a dream or is this in real life, that was almost kind of helping show you that it's in the dream.
Yeah.
In a way. But I really just like the shot personally. I mean, it's 2-story house, red door, it's dark. I mean, it just looks like kind of a haunting. So
yeah, well, and now that you mention it, that is something we see in a ton of movies now, where you've got sort of the nighttime outdoor shot of the house where things are going on, and it shows that it's dark and everything's still, and that it's isolated, and that's like the build up. That's like the signal for the audience that stuff's about to go down.
Yeah.
But I think in general, this movie, it kind of along those same lines, had a really different feel than the first one, in that it didn't feel like fall. Like I feel like most of the slasher movies we've watched, they have like a very dark look to them. Mm-hmm. But this setting really wasn't like dark and foggy for the most part.
No, it was almost like bright, sunny, and deserty.
Yeah,
almost. Like,
yeah.
Not that you can't have the fall and the desert. It seemed dry,
Yeah, it's not using like that Halloween imagery. But then it also had a lot of like elements of a goofy comedy.
Yeah, you could kind of see that it's moving in the direction of the Freddy that we kind of know now. Like, we know Freddy as almost like a smart-ass comedian, and you could tell it was kind of going in that direction, and I don't know if it was on purpose or not.
Yeah, well, I saw that with Freddy, but I also saw it like outside of the Freddy scenes.
Oh.
Like the non-violent scenes. Like when Jesse's like playing softball and he's like checking out the girls, and then he gets hit in the head with the softball. Yeah, like, and then the goofy like cleaning my room montage and stuff. It's almost like, what is this doing in my slasher movie? Because it was really, really a hard turn, and there. Even the scenes, where he and his friend like get in the argument, and then it just cuts to them back out there being punished, having to assume the position again. It's like, that was actually kind of funny, and I'm not used to laughing at these movies. Yeah,
talking bad about the coach, and he shows up behind.
Yeah,
definitely a classic. I did also read where they said that the writer of this put in like a lot of homoerotic things in the movie.
Yeah.
Which I think, like, I read that before I watched it, so I was really kind of looking at it, but I mean, that's everywhere. If you look up anything about this movie, like any facts or anything, it's like in there for sure. But so I had wondered if the writer was doing that, if he was adding things in like this just because he's like, what, screw it, let's just go for it.
Yeah.
So
well, and I had read too that there was a deliberate attempt to put more comedy in it, and to like have it not be quite as heavy. And I think that definitely, and that kind of goes back to the whole like, it doesn't have that dark Halloween, turning into winter type feel. But just the overall like vibe of the movie for a lot of it.
Yeah.
It was like you had that, but then you also had some very like, okay, we've scared you a lot. Let's ease it back a little bit. Let's let you catch your breath and not kind of maintain that same feel through it. So that was really different, than just kind of some of these others. And I know you said that, Freddy didn't show up in the movie near as much as you wanted him to, but I felt like he had way more like direct shots and close-ups and like actual speaking dialogue lines and stuff. Yeah. So I was glad to see more of that. That was one thing that I thought the movie did well. But it was also just interesting how like it had a lot more of Freddy doing stuff in the real world and a lot less happening in the dream world. Yeah. And I didn't care for that quite as much, just because I felt like him in the dream world where you didn't know what the rules were and everything was just kind of crazy and he could stretch out his arms as wide as he wanted to, and then just sort of dancing around that boundary between dream and wake was what made the first one so good, and I felt like this one did less of that. Yeah,
it definitely raised a lot of questions that I have for the movie. Like and in my opinion, excuse me, my opinion almost hurt the movie more than helped. But anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, as weird as it was, this is the only sequel that we've talked about this month that actually made more money than the original.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about.
Because like Halloween 2 was a much, much higher budget than the original and made way, way, way less at the box office.
Yeah.
Friday the 13th cost a little bit more, but also, didn't make... It made closer, but it didn't get there. Whereas this one, it cost a little more, but it also made more. And looking back at it, sort of comparatively, this one I think is probably the most accessible because of all that stuff that we talked about. Like, it didn't have that like heavy slasher movie feel the whole way through.
Yeah.
There were like those other kind of Hollywood elements to it. So I guess it kind of makes sense, but it was still just a real weird movie. And yeah, but all that to say, which of the sequels that we watched is your favorite now that we've kind of been through all three that we're going to do this month?
Out of the sequels specifically that we did, Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street, it was Friday the 13th.
Same for me. Yeah. This I could put it in order: Friday the 13th, Halloween, and then this one. I just really like the Halloween story anyway, so I kind of gotta go with it. That's why I'm excited, to watch the new one that's coming out. But I'm hands down. Yeah. Well, cool. It was close enough. It was different from the story. There was obviously some things wrong with Friday the 13th Part 2, but it was close enough. Yeah, I agree with you on the ordering, but I will also say that this one kept my attention more than the other two the whole way through, just because the other two I felt like got into a little bit more of a formula, like a predictable formula as they went along, whereas this one, I had no idea what was going to happen. This movie was so out there and just kind of so off the wall that I was paying attention the whole time. I felt like I agree. I felt like I was being forced to do that, though. Yes. Like I was almost being like, it was like I was having to pay attention because otherwise I'd get lost. Yeah. But it's. Yeah. Yep. So who do you think would like this movie? Well, like we talked about already, I think this one was a lot more accessible than the first one. And so I think like casual fans of slashers, maybe. Just because, it's still bloody, but it's not as bloody as the first one. It's definitely not as bloody as like Halloween 2. There's a lot more comedy. There's a lot less like dark. It's a lot less scary, in my opinion. So I think overall it's something that maybe younger people or people that are kind of trying to get into slashers but maybe have a weaker stomach might still enjoy. But that's kind of where I landed with it. Yeah, I mean, I would kind of like, I kind of feel like with Nightmare on Elm Street, that it's almost like the movie that people would watch on like TV shows to show that they're watching like a horror movie. Yeah, so it's, I don't know. I think that makes it. I guess it's not PG by any means, but it's just it's definitely not. I mean, and they we call it a slasher, but it's so different from it. So if you're a fan of Halloween or Friday the 13th Part 2, either one of those, then this, just know when you watch this one, it's totally different. Yeah, like I got the feeling with this one that they didn't have to do a lot of fighting to make it not X-rated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, well, you want to do the spoilers and then get to the rest of it? Let's do it. Cool.
Warning, warning, warning. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. This is your warning. Warning, warning, warning. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. This is your warning. If it's not obvious enough. Warning, spoilers.
What's up, boys? Back. Yeah. It's old Tom here. I'm so terrible at this. So we're back from the spoiler. Yeah. It's a good time. This is my favorite time. I'm going to start it off with my guns appointed, and I got a question for you.
Oh, turning the tables. I like it. What's up?
Yes. So what are your thoughts about them actually bringing Freddy in? Do you have any thoughts or opinions about bringing Freddy into the real world?
Yeah, well, like I said, before, one thing I really loved about the first movie was just sort of him, or sort of him having to fight through whatever boundaries there were. Yeah. Like it felt like there were boundaries keeping him out of the real world. Mm-hmm. And so his acting through the dreams and attacking people as they fell asleep, and sort of, it felt like he was restrained in a way and having to operate beyond that. And that to me was a really interesting thing that I've not seen a lot of other horror movies do. Whereas this one, it didn't really seem like he had a hard time possessing Jesse. Which, granted, if the air conditioning went out in my house, in the summer for an extended period of time,
yeah,
you bet I'd be killing people. Because this past summer, our AC went out in this apartment. It was out for approximately, I'd say, we went about 36 hours where it was not under 80 degrees in the apartment.
That's brutal.
I can't guarantee I wouldn't have murdered somebody given the opportunity. Because that was miserable.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That was, what they say was like 96 or something in their house.
Yeah. None of that.
Dang,
yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. It was funny to me that it took him till like all the way at the end of the movie for him to be like, hey, I'm just going to stay the night at somebody else's house.
Yeah. I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah. But
yeah, I mean, that's the thing with me, in my opinion on it. It was, you had like I wondered like, well, okay, are they trying to do this because they don't want you to feel like you're safe, like, you know, because if Freddy can only be in the dream world, then, you know, just stay awake or take the stay up pills.
Yeah.
But it was also because they kind of strayed away from that. I think I that was like one of my more like frustrated moments. Like, I don't think they necessarily had to do that. Granted, they did bring him into the real world in the first movie. Yeah. But it was, you know, obviously a little bit different. They were trying to kill him. Yeah. You know, this one.
Well, yeah, in the first one, they had to pull him into the real world. Like, that was a deliberate thing because that was where they felt like they could defeat him. Whereas in this one, it was like he didn't really have any boundaries on where he could be. And so I feel like it was a very different interpretation of the character. You know, obviously by a different writer, but I also feel like everything you thought you knew about him from the first movie didn't really apply anymore. Yeah. And that kind of kept it fresh in a way that maybe, you know, in Halloween 2 or Friday the 13th Part 2, that wasn't the case. Yeah.
I agree. So, going into that, what did you love or hate about this movie?
Ooh. Well, I love that I don't know that there was necessarily more Freddy, but it was more like up close and more of his personality and speaking and stuff. So I liked that you got more of a feel for kind of who he was personality-wise. Because, I mean, as you've mentioned before, the way that you think of him now is matched a lot more by this movie maybe than the previous one. So I liked that. But then I also, you know, like we were just talking about, I liked that it was like a different type of scare. And I don't necessarily... oh, gosh, I sound like...
You sound like me.
Not like you. I just sound like I can't make up my mind because I'm like, I'll never be happy. But it's like, I liked that it was different. I liked that they took a different turn with the character, but I liked the character better in the first one, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, it does.
You know, it's kind of like with Halloween 2. I liked that it was like a direct follow-up. Like, there was no pause in the action, but I also feel like that made the second movie weaker because it didn't really allow for as much like story development for Michael.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a few things that I wasn't too happy about.
Oh, so you're going straight to hate? Yeah. All right.
I mean, I wasn't the biggest fan of the movie personally, but I show my cards. Yeah. So I think one of my frustrations is the rules that we've already kind of talked about, so I'm not going to get too in depth, but I like that there were rules for him because you have to sleep eventually. Like, I remember saying that in the first one, like, you have to sleep eventually. Trying to bring him out was more so frustrating because it was just like, it was like you said, there was no fight. If you just put up, like, come on, man, come on. And the next thing you know, like, he's about to kill his younger sister. Jesse's about to kill his younger sister. Yeah. So that was one thing. Like, I just wish that they didn't do that. I didn't like the 13 minutes of Freddy screen time, and that was because in the first movie, like, when we both said this, or I at least said this, all my favorite scenes were the ones with Freddy in it. Yeah. It was a little bit more terrifying because in the dream he can do the crazy things, like have his arm super long and scratching. Then there was also just like a kind of a minor thing, but like towards the end when Freddy's out 100% in the real world, he grows his claws, or like the claw thing, he grows those out of his fingers, and he's not wearing the actual glove.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's your thing. You know, like that's, and you're just like now gonna grow them. Like, why wouldn't you grow? First off, why wouldn't you just grow the glove, or why wouldn't you grow a gun and just, you know, shoot everyone?
Yeah.
You know, so, and I kind of wondered, like, should they get a pass because it wasn't the original writer, which in this case is Wes Craven, which is like known as one of the greater horror movie writers of all time, if not the greatest. But, you know, do they get a pass on that? And I don't think they necessarily do. I understand trying to take something in your own direction. Yeah. However, you're taking something that was established very well and just kind of crapping on it, in my opinion. So anyway, those were my kind of frustrations with it. Now, I did have a few things that I liked. I thought that Freddy's makeup that he wore in this one was a little bit better. Yeah. And I actually had also read where they said that the guy who did the makeup this time, like, he studied like burn victims and stuff and tried to mimic that more. Yeah. And there were a few scenes that we can get into that I enjoyed, but overall, I just felt it kind of fell short of what the potential, you know, that was there. Yeah. And it kind of limited it, making it where you have to live in the house for that to you know, for Freddy to continue, because why not just tear the house down then? You know? Then what?
Yeah. And that was one of the things I think that we had as a question coming out of the first podcast was like, who was Freddy actually going after? And I don't think the first one really answered that super well, but this one, if he was like somehow tied to the house, that makes more sense sort of retroactively. But yeah, there were a lot of things about this movie that weren't super great. Like those comedy scenes in general, I thought hurt what it was trying to do more than helped. Yeah. And I also just, the acting was bad, but not just like the dialogue delivery, but like, have you ever seen, like, okay, so Jesse and Lisa kissing was the most awkward thing in the world. It's like, it's like they were supposed to act like two people who had never kissed or even seen anyone else kiss. Like, if that's what they were supposed to be doing, they nailed the performance, but I don't think that was the case.
Yeah, I thought that too, and Katie made a comment about that when they did their first, like, little peck. She's like, what the hell was that? I don't know.
Yeah. And then there was like that unpacking montage where he's, you know, snapping and dancing around and trying on different clothes. Like, that was the moment when I started cheering for Freddy. I'm like, you get him.
Yeah. Listening to, for the record, that song's called Touch Me All Night Long, and it's by a group called Wish. So I'll tell you that.
The 80s were a weird time.
Yeah, it was too cheesy. It's like and which, you know, was another filler aspect. And it was, you know, this movie's already short as it is. Yeah, you could have gonna lay this crap on me. You know,
you could have put Freddy on the screen for that.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So were there other scenes that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think one of the scenes, I mean, the first scene going into it, albeit kind of confusing afterward, was I enjoyed that one because it just started with, you know, with the dream. Yeah. And which, here's a fun fact too, Robert Englund was the bus driver who picked him up in the first place. Like he's the actual like driver.
That's cool.
You can kind of notice. So I like that, and I think I enjoyed it just because it was, like I was saying, like, here we go, like, it's back to business, as usual. So you know, that was one that really stuck out. The reason why I was kind of confusing was, like, he was kind of picked on in that, like, the girls were kind of pointing and making fun of him, but then, like, he wasn't really that, you know, picked on afterward.
In the rest of the movie. That was just like his dream, like maybe the way he saw himself or his own insecurity or something.
Yeah, for sure. I liked where they could have gone with, like, the pool party scene. Yeah. Like, but it ended up being, like, super awkward and not cool at all. But I like where they could have gone. There could have been like some mayhem there, and like, and then the last thing is, and I can't remember the line specifically, but I think it's something where, so it's when Freddy's trying to convince Jesse to, come to the dark side, basically.
Yeah.
And he says, "You got the body," and then he pulls his skin back on his head, and he's like, "And I got the brain."
Yeah.
And it shows his brain. Like, I thought that was cool. I was like, "Oh yeah, that's
I had that
legit."
one in my notes too.
Yeah. So those were mine.
Yeah. Can we talk for a minute about the bar scene?
Yeah.
Like what?
The gay bar scene?
So I didn't put that together until I was reading about it afterwards because I was so confused.
Yeah.
But basically what happens is at one point, it's like he's trying to stay awake at night. So he gets up, he leaves home, he goes to this random rundown bar, which a high school kid just walks into the bar. Like maybe that was easier in the 80s, but okay. And then the coach is there in this like weird looking shirt. And instead of them like having a conversation or the coach being like, "Hey, get out of here, you're too young," or the coach like trying to hide from him, the coach makes him go to the gym and run laps.
Yeah.
Like,
and it was just accepted.
What?
Yeah.
And it was just like not questioned. It was just like presented as a normal part of the plot that needed no explanation. Like, I can't sleep tonight because it's too hot and I'm afraid that my dreams will be haunted. So clearly I'm just going to go to this bar with a bunch of adults. Oh, I saw a teacher. Guess I have to run laps. Like, what? Yeah. Those are just like randomly generated sentences. I have no idea what they were trying to do with that.
And then it kind of turned into like, I mean, he was fixing to get like raped by his teacher.
But see, I didn't. So I think you probably saw that because you read about like the gay undertones of the movie afterwards or beforehand, whereas I didn't read about any of that until after. So at the time, I didn't see that. I was just really, really confused. And then you see that scene, though, I felt like was important because it's when you realize that he is acting while possessed by Freddy sometimes. Mm-hmm. Not just Freddy is haunting him. Mm-hmm. And so that, because you see the coach get like tied up and then beat to death with the towel,
like you have to see his butt.
Super awkward. And
it's like, why?
Yeah, there was no reason for that, but that was also like a big turning point in the movie as far as like now apparently Freddy's in control when he wants to be, and so when Jesse thinks he's asleep, Freddy is actually doing stuff. So but then so that was an example of a scene that I feel like was not pulled off well. But then the one where Jesse finds himself in his sister's bedroom and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And you're set up to think that you're seeing from Freddy's point of view. But then it's Jesse and he's like, "Oh, nothing, go back to sleep." And then he looks down and he's wearing like the claw glove. Mm-hmm. That I thought was like a really good way of showing, Freddy is now like kind of controlling things in Jesse's body when he's not aware of it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good call. That's a legit answer. I'll allow it.
But I also thought that was like a terrifying idea. Like the idea of being that close to like hurting somebody that you care about and not knowing it, like waking up in the middle of that moment. That was like, super disturbing. Yeah. But and then the only other scene I had was I really liked it when Freddy starts like, it's like he's pushing his way out of inside Jesse, and you can see his face start to come out of Jesse's chest in a similar way that you saw it like pushing through the wall in the first movie. Like that I thought was a really cool effect. Mm-hmm. But
a cool effect, but it was just like, what the...
It didn't make a lot of sense, but it was a cool effect. So, but anyway, so what did you think about, I guess the part we haven't talked about is the ending, and what did you think about the way that they wrapped it up?
Yeah, I thought it was just lame. I mean, just being honest, I thought it was kind of boring. I mean, it was just like...
Well, it was cliche, right? Like, I mean,
cliche,
like Lisa yells, "I love you, Jesse," and somehow that makes Freddy not have power over him anymore. Like,
and like this,
like
is
a teenage relationship is enough to overcome pure evil.
Right. This is the same girl who was like just getting rides from him in the car, according to her, at the beginning of the movie. And then like a couple days pass by, and then like that love and bond. I don't know. It was just like, this is how it's going to end. Like, this is it. Like,
well, and like 10 minutes before, she's like, I don't know, this person I care about's going through a really rough time. I should probably go see if he's okay. But I mean, then I'd have to leave the party. And her friend's like, it's just a party. You should go. And she's like, yeah, I guess. Like,
right.
That's not undying love.
Well, and you also have, like, I feel like, and I don't know what this writer has, like, the other things that, other movies that, they've done, but it was just like, in the pool scene, they're just like, hey, it's okay. We're not going to hurt you. And it's like, no, this dude's going to hurt you. Like, so don't say that. And so then it ends with kind of the same thing. Like, I know you're in there. Like, come out. You can come out. I love you. And then, oh, that worked. Yeah. It's just like, what the heck? Like, come on. Yeah. Like, kill Jesse. Unfortunately, you got to kill him. And that's going to take Freddy out. And then, with the extra scene at the very end, where it's obviously, they just stole from the first movie that, that ending, the surprise ending, Freddy's not actually gone. It's like, well, no kidding, he's not gone. Like, he just disappeared at the 5 minutes ago. Yeah. So it was just, it fluttered out, and it just wasn't. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. Yeah, for sure. And the one thing I did like about sort of leading up to the ending was that scene where they're in the power plant, and the way that there kept being like the fake things happening, and it was almost like, now Freddy is able to create or at least create the illusion of the things that he was able to do in the dream in the real world. And so she was constantly having to like examine and say, is this really happening? Or is this just him trying to scare me? And like, what's real and what's not? Like, that was kind of the type of thing from the first movie I liked. And that was really the only scene in this movie where I felt like that was pulled off well. So I liked kind of the lead up to it, but then the way they wrapped it up wasn't so great. And it was just like, he caught on fire too. It's like, you started the fire, just put it out with your mind. Like, what are you doing, man? Yeah.
But I thought that the Freddy's hand coming out through the friend's chest was a good like jump scare ending. I mean, it didn't make a lot of sense in the context of the story, but it did at least give you the idea that maybe he's not in the real world anymore, but Freddy is still very much alive and well in the dream world. So that kind of sets up the sequels. But we gotta have more sequels out of this bad boy. Yeah, exactly. I wonder how pissed off Wes Craven got like at this. It's just like, what in the you gotta be kidding. Yeah. I handed you a character, and you just ruined it. Yeah. Good night. Yeah. So, question for you. If you could be Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, or Michael Myers, which one would you be, and why? Freddy Krueger from the first movie. Okay. First victim, you. Oh. I'm sorry. I have no mercy. That might be the most hateful thing you've said to me on this podcast. Good. And that is saying something. You're dead. Don't go to sleep tonight. I feel like you could just have the most fun with that one, man. Yeah. Like, there's just, you have so much you can do. I mean, granted, they're all killing people, so it doesn't matter who I pick in this situation. However, it's just like, if all of a sudden I want to be 7 feet tall, I can do that. Well, and the nice and everyone's going to sleep, so I'm going to kill everyone. Yeah. Well, the nice thing about being Freddy, too, is you get your days off. That's true. Yeah, that's very true. I feel like Jason's a full-time job. I know, you have to live in that crappy shack. And I feel like I had another question. I don't remember what it was now. I have a question. Okay. So what have you been listening to this week? What a transition. Thanks, man. Nice. I've been listening to a lot of Touché Amoré. Oh, Touché. Yeah. They had the album Stage 4 a couple of years ago, and the first song on there, Flowers and You, is just really, really, really good. And the thing I like about it is that it still has kind of the like aggressive, like harder vocals, but musically it's a lot more kind of nuanced, and I don't know, it's just really different than what you would expect. Like the rhythms and things that are happening feel really different than what you would expect with that vocal style, and I like that. So nice. What about you? Very nice. Mine has been Song of the Plains by Colter. He's a Canadian,
Don't let that hold it against him.
I'm turning this off right now.
Don't hold it against him. He just came out with a new album, and it's very classic sounding. I would say like folk, as in like the guitar sounds really good. Generally acoustic guitar, and his lyrics are just cool. He tells a lot of stories in his lyrics, which I love. Like, that's one of my favorite things. He has a song called Wild Bill Hickok that I really like, that kind of tells that story. And yeah, it's definitely mellow, super deep voice. It's really good.
Does this guy remind you at all of John Moreland?
He does remind me of John Moreland, as in a deeper acoustic guitar playing, even though Colter's not Southern. Like, just the lyrics are really good. I love John Moreland to death, especially like just from when we saw him in that small record store. Like, what was that, like 2008 or 7 or 6?
Yeah, it was probably 6 or 7.
Man, he was playing with John Moreland, the Black Gold Band.
Yeah,
it was so good. And then you get to see him who he is today, which is just awesome. And like, I've talked to like some Tulsa bands about him, and they're just not like hip on him. But we know from the Tulsa music scene that it's just shit. So it's like, obviously, like, if they're not happy for him, then like he's obviously doing great, and they're not. So
that's funny because it's true.
It's 100% true and sad. But anyway, yeah, it definitely reminds me of John Moreland. Nice. So if you...
Well, now you sold me.
John Moreland, I would definitely listen to Colter.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening. I feel like Jason's a full-time job.
I know,
plus, you have to live in that crappy shack.
And plus, I think he's a little bit mentally retarded, just from the look of him. Who would you pick? I hope it's Jason. Because, not because you are, but just like, I just ruined it. If
right. You just set it up so that your answer was the only acceptable one.
Yeah.